This is the introduction to Chapter 6, the American cinema in the 1930s. A lot going on in the 1930s. This is basically the decade that transitioned from silent films to talkies, and so that's a big change. Also, we have the censorship going on and the production code, and we'll get to talk about all. So let's first talk about some of the transition from the silent films to the talkies. We've got a few different ways of movie producers to try to resist this movement. It talks about how they would they bought out production rights, or how do I say this, writers. They brought writers and actors from stage plays because they figured that only stage actors are going to be able to become talkies actors, but didn't make any sense because some of the greatest stars of the silent films got their start on stage. So, yeah, anyways, not very bright, but that was one thing that a few movie producers tried to do in order to stop or slow the transition into talkies. Also, with the birth of talkies, we get a few different problems arising. We need to start having a code of conduct or censorship. So we have the production code, and this is what the production code says. This is not exactly word for word, but here we go. Some excerpts. The excessive depiction of violence was out. So was sex. Even married couples had to sleep in twin beds. Words like sex, hell, and damn were strictly forbidden, along with dozens of others. Adultery and illicit sex must not be explicitly treated or justified. So that sounds like a censorship on plot as well. The production code, passion should be treated so as not to simulate the lower emotions. I'm assuming that passion, they're indicating sex, and lower emotions, I'm assuming that that'd be any kind of hip movement or thereof, with minor exceptions. We also have a birth of new genres coming out with talkies that gives us opportunities to do things that we couldn't do before, or we as in the filmmakers to do before. So we get the genre of gangster pictures, musicals, and screwball comedies, and we're going to talk about them. So it says here that gangster films were not designed specifically for the talkies. It was just such an improvement to be able to hear the gunfire and the shooting and the car chases and all that. And so talkies didn't really birth gangster films. It was more that they enhanced gangster films. We've got films like Underworld and The Racket. Then these were silent films. These were gangster silent films. But then we go on to have other films like Scarface and Public Enemy, and those were gangster films that are talkies. Apparently this is also the area that there was a burst of gangster film. To quote the book on the gangster films, there were scores of other gangster films made in little more than 3 years. So apparently there was just an explosion of gangster films. Now, what I know about gangster films, doing a little extra study, extra credit, extra study, is that gangster films, by definition, the bad guy cannot win because of the era that we lived in, especially with things like married couples having to sleep in separate beds. It was socially unacceptable for them to produce what we would now call a caper film, which is where the bad guy can get away, they can succeed. But there's a whole bunch of movies where you're rooting for the bad guy because you hate the establishment, they're anti-establishment, but really their moral code is ingrained in them so deep that they can't have the enemy win. The bad guy can't win. We have that now with movies like Ocean's 11. They're the bad guys, they're stealing, but you root for them and they end up winning in the end. Yay! But a movie like Heat, and I realize it's the wrong era, but a movie like Heat, they steal the money, they start to get away, and then the guy dies in the end. Of course, that's spoiler alert, for anybody who hasn't seen that movie. But yeah, now it's socially acceptable for the bad guy to get away with it, and that's an enjoyable film. But back then, that was not okay. Now we got to talk about musicals for a minute. We got a dude named Berkeley, 1995 to 1976. did musical sequences like Whoopee, 42nd Street, and Diggers of 1935. Apparently he was very good. Didn't see any of those. They did a lot of close-up shots in these movies, and they actually did some cranes, a crane camera shot, which apparently was new and cool. So that is new and cool. And yeah. It says that silent comedies didn't actually evolve all that much. It just went from the silent gag was replaced by the wise crack. So now we've got one-liners and funny little things, and we get little parodies and cynicism, I guess. And apparently they were much better now with the talkies than they were with the silent films. So there was improvement with comedies as well. And that pretty much puts us at time. That was the introduction to Chapter 6, the American cinema in the 1930s.